Winged Hussars versus Russia. How Poland invaded Moscow. What do you get when a dead prince returns from the grave? A Polish king decides he wants Russia for breakfast, and a cavalry charge breaks through enemy lines like a saber through soup? You get the time of troubles. Russia's most chaotic, corpse-launching, crown-snatching era of pure historical madness. Between 1598 and 1613, Russia wasn't just troubled, it was tormented. A famine killed hundreds of thousands. A boyar became Tsar. Then came a mysterious monk claiming to be the long-dead son of Ivan the Terrible. Was he a miracle or a master con artist? How did a fake prince convince Poland to invade Russia? Why did Moscow launch a Tsar's ashes from a cannon? What made the winged Hussars the deadliest cavalry in Europe? And how did they break through fences, bullets, and pikemen to rewrite history? From the rise of false Dimitris to the thunderous charge at Klushino, this is a tale of betrayal, ambition, and sabers that sang through snow. Welcome to Dark Crown Chronicles, where history isn't just told, it's unleashed. Russia in 1598 was like a medieval Game of Thrones episode, minus the dragons but with plenty of fire. Tsar Fyodor I, the last of the Rurik dynasty, died childless, leaving the throne as empty as a vodka bottle at a boyar banquet. Enter Boris Godunov, a boyar with ambition and a beard that screamed, "I'm in charge now." He was elected Tsar, but not everyone was thrilled, especially the nobles who thought a boyar ruling Russia was like letting your gardener run the palace. Then came the famine of 1601-1603, which was so bad it made the Black Plague look like a bad flu season. Crops failed, people starved, and Boris's approval ratings plummeted faster than a lead onion. Russia was ripe for rebellion, and fate was about to serve up a pretender with flair. In March 1604, a mysterious young man strutted into the court of King Sigismund III in Krakow like he was auditioning for Tsar Idol. He claimed to be Dmitry Ivanovich, the youngest son of Ivan the Terrible, yes, that Ivan, and the rightful heir to the Russian throne. The twist? Dmitry had supposedly died in 1591 under mysterious circumstances, which in Russian history usually means someone got stabbed and no one wants to talk about it. Sigismund III, a man who loved Catholicism almost as much as he loved meddling in Russian affairs, saw an opportunity. Dmitry converted to Catholicism faster than you can say papal blessing and promised Polish nobles land, influence, and maybe even a few Russian fur coats if they helped him take the throne. The Polish magnates, skeptical but greedy, nodded politely and handed Dmitry a fat purse of gold. "Go forth, Tsarish lad," they said, "and conquer." Armed with 1,600 Polish soldiers, 2,000 Ukrainian Cossacks, and a few mercenaries who probably just wanted adventure and vodka, Dmitry invaded Russia in October 1604. Boris Godunov, now sweating bullets, declared the man was actually Yuri Otrepiev, a runaway monk with a flair for drama and deception. Despite Boris's PR campaign, Dmitry gained ground until the Battle of Dobrynitsy, where his forces were crushed like stale bliney. But fate, ever the dramatic playwright, killed off Boris Godunov in April 1605. His son Fyodor II took the throne, but was promptly murdered along with his mother. Russia's throne was now emptier than a boyar's promises. In June, Dmitry entered Moscow like a conquering hero and was crowned Tsar. Cue the royal fanfare, Polish champagne, and a wedding to Polish noblewoman Marina Mniszek in May 1606. Russia had a new Tsar and a new headache. Dmitry's reign was short and spicy. The boyars, Russia's elite power brokers, were horrified by the influx of Polish nobles and Catholic priests at court. Marina refused to convert to Orthodoxy, which in Russia was like refusing to eat borscht, unforgivable. The boyars plotted, pounced, and on May 17, 1606, stormed the Kremlin. Dmitry was killed, cremated, and, this is not a joke, his ashes were fired from a cannon toward Poland. Talk about a diplomatic message. Vasily Shuisky, a boyar with a distant Rurik bloodline and a knack for surviving palace coups, became Tsar. But peace was still a distant dream. Just when Russia thought it was done with imposters, another Dmitry popped up in 1607, claiming he had survived the Kremlin attack. People called him the second false Dmitry, or imposter II, Tsar Harder. Marina Mniszek, now widowed and apparently unfazed by cannon-fired cremation, declared this new Dmitry was her husband. Either she was deeply in love or really bad at recognizing faces. This Dmitry rallied support, took territory, and plunged Russia deeper into chaos. The Crimean Tatars and Nogai horde joined the party, raiding Russian lands like it was Black Friday at the Kremlin. Vasily Shuisky, desperate, made a deal with Sweden's King Charles IX in 1609. In exchange for military help, he handed over the Karela fortress. Swedish General Jacob de la Gardie joined Russian forces and marched toward besieged Moscow. Sigismund III, watching Sweden meddle in Russia like an ex crashing your wedding, decided it was time to act. He rallied nobles, the Catholic Church, and even the Pope, raising an army of 22,000 soldiers. In September 1609, he invaded Russia and besieged Smolensk, a fortress so strategic it was basically the key to Moscow's front door. But Smolensk was tough. The siege dragged on, and Sigismund's campaign began to strain Poland's resources and patience. Meanwhile, Russia was still a mess of impostors, invasions, and boyars playing musical thrones. Our story picks up with false Dmitry II, the sequel nobody asked for. Once the darling of Polish nobles, Dmitry now found himself ghosted harder than a bad Tinder date. Why? Because King Sigismund III had a change of heart. He no longer wanted Dmitry as Tsar, he wanted Russia itself. Dmitry's Polish troops, sensing the shift in royal vibes, ditched him and joined Sigismund's army. Ouch. Meanwhile, Tsar Vasily Shuisky, Russia's reigning monarch and part-time crisis manager, teamed up with Sweden, yes, Sweden, to squash Dmitry and push back the Polish threat. The Russian-Swedish alliance like a medieval Avengers team, minus the spandex. Hold up, if you're still watching, you clearly love epic tales of betrayal, battles, and cannon-blasted imposters as much as we do. Then hit subscribe to join the Dark Crown Chronicles, where history gets wild, weird, and unforgettable. More battles, more betrayals, and yes, more cannon-blasted imposters coming up. Enter Hetman Stanisław Żółkiewski, Poland's military mastermind and part-time pyromaniac. Learning of the Russian army's movement, he grabbed a small but elite force, mostly winged Hussars, Poland's cavalry superheroes, and galloped off to intercept them. Most of the Polish army stayed near Smolensk, probably enjoying pierogi and waiting for orders. At the end of June 1610, Żółkiewski clashed with a Russian vanguard near Tsaryovo Zaimoshche, defeating 5,000 men and besieging their camp. But he knew the main Russian army was nearby, so he left a babysitting squad behind and marched through the night to surprise the big boys. On July 4th, 1610, just before dawn, Żółkiewski's troops appeared like ghosts in the mist before the Russian camp. Dmitry Shuisky, the Russian commander, was blissfully unaware, probably sipping kvass and humming folk tunes. Żółkiewski wanted a surprise attack, but his troops were still straggling in from the night march. So much for stealth. The battlefield was a logistical nightmare. The Russians were camped between the Vodovka and Zat rivers, limiting their movement. They had 20,000 Russian troops, 3,300 Swedish mercenaries, and 11 cannons. Żółkiewski had just 2,500 cavalry, mostly Hussars, 400 Cossacks, 200 infantry, and 2 cannons, which were still stuck in traffic. Żółkiewski, ever the strategist, ordered nearby villages burned to deny the Russians cover. He also had fences and obstacles partially destroyed to give his cavalry room to charge. The stage was set. At 4 a.m., Polish trumpets blared and drums thundered. The winged Hussars, with their iconic feathered backs and terrifying speed, charged like a hurricane. Alexander Zborowski's heavy cavalry hit the Russian center. The impact was brutal, like a battering ram made of steel and fury. Though the Hussars had to squeeze through gaps in the fence, they tore through the Russian front lines. The Russians began to retreat, their formations crumbling like soggy blini. The Hussars regrouped and charged again, this time into the second line. Russian cavalry met them head-on. Sabers clashed, lances shattered, and horses screamed. It was chaos with a soundtrack. Coming up next on Dark Crown Chronicles, Romanov dynasty begins, 1613, Mikhail Romanov. After the chaos, famine, and cannon-blasted imposters, Russia finally finds its Tsar. How did a 16-year-old boy become the founder of a dynasty that ruled for 300 years? Stick around, or hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the rise of the Romanovs. Now back to our intriguing adventure. The Poles lost their long lances in the first charge, so the second wave was all swords and grit. They pushed deep into Russian ranks but were flanked and forced to retreat, only to regroup and charge again. It was like a deadly ballet with hooves and steel. Meanwhile, on the Polish left wing, Mikołaj Struś faced the Swedish mercenaries, grumpy, unpaid, but still deadly. Their fences were intact, and their musketeers fired at close range while pikemen held the line. The Polish cavalry couldn't break through. Horses panicked, riders fell, and the Swedes held firm. Despite their lack of pay, the Swedes fought like IKEA furniture, sturdy, reliable, and surprisingly hard to dismantle. The Polish left wing struggled, and the psychological toll of musket fire was immense. Back on the right wing, Żółkiewski unleashed fresh Hussars. They smashed through Russian lines again, advancing north. But once more they lost their lances and were stopped by the second Russian line. Flanked and exhausted, they retreated. Then came the third wave, more Hussars, more fury. The Polish left wing couldn't match the breakthroughs. The Swedes were simply too disciplined. Musket fire and pikes turned the battlefield into a meat grinder. Eventually, the first line of Polish cavalry retreated, and the second line rushed forward. The battle raged on, but the tide was turning. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Żółkiewski's tactical genius and the sheer power of the Hussars led to a decisive Polish victory. Russian forces were routed, and the path to Moscow was wide open. The victory at Klushino was so stunning that Moscow's boyars offered the Russian throne to Sigismund's son, Władysław. But Sigismund, ever the overachiever, vetoed the plan. He wanted to be Tsar himself. This blunder cost Poland the chance to rule Russia and left a legacy of resentment. As the battle dragged on, the Polish Hussars, those glorious cavalrymen with wings on their backs and steel in their souls, found themselves in a pickle. The fences the Russians had built were like medieval speed bumps, and the musketeers behind them were firing with all the accuracy of blindfolded squirrels. Still, bullets are bullets, and the Hussars were getting peppered like a steak at a boyar's banquet. To make themselves harder targets, the Poles expanded their ranks, widening their formation like a majestic eagle spreading its wings. The idea? Present a broader front so the musketeers couldn't concentrate fire. The result? A slightly more dramatic target. The charge was no more effective than the previous one, and the fences remained stubbornly intact. One Polish horseman, having lost his lance, probably to a Russian pikeman with a grudge, had to switch to his saber. This made him vulnerable to the Swedish pikemen, who were still holding the line like IKEA furniture, sturdy, pointy, and surprisingly effective. Just when things looked grim, the Polish infantry and two cannons finally rolled onto the battlefield like late guests at a royal wedding. They opened fire from a distance, giving the Hussars some much-needed backup. Musketeers ducked, pikemen flinched, and the battlefield lit up like a Slavic fireworks show. Meanwhile, the Polish right wing was running out of fresh troops. Despite their earlier breakthroughs, they couldn't crack the enemy formations. Żółkiewski, ever the chessmaster, sent reinforcements from his reserves. But most Hussars were now tired, demoralized, and fighting with sabers instead of lances. Still, they charged again, because Polish cavalry doesn't quit, it just gallops harder. The Russian left wing, battered and bruised, sent out their cavalry to slow down the Polish advance. What followed was a full-blown cavalry brawl, hooves pounding, sabers clashing, and warriors screaming like banshees at a vodka festival. At first, it was anyone's game. But the Hussars, with their discipline and flair, began to dominate. The Russians retreated north, chased by Polish cavalry. The Russian horsemen had done their job. They slowed the Poles down. The Hussars, realizing they'd lost momentum, returned to their starting positions. Then came the riders, Russian cavalry armed with firearms and a flair for dramatic entrances. As the Poles approached, the riders turned, fired their pistols, and galloped back like they'd just pulled off a prank. The Poles pressed on, undeterred. A second line of riders appeared and did the same thing. This time, the Hussars had had enough. They accelerated into the hail of bullets like they were charging through a snowstorm. They caught up with the riders, and a new cavalry battle erupted. Steel clashed, horses screamed, and the air was thick with smoke and fury. The riders fought valiantly, but the Hussars were relentless. Eventually, the riders broke and fled. Their retreat triggered a domino effect. The entire Russian left wing panicked and bolted. First ranks fled, then second, then third, It was a full-blown stampede. Many were cut down, others fled far beyond their camp, probably reconsidering their life choices. The Russian right wing was still holding, but now exposed. Polish infantry played a key role, first firing volleys, then drawing swords and charging like they were auditioning for a medieval action film. The biggest blow came from the flank. With the left wing gone, the right wing was vulnerable. The Swedish mercenaries, realizing they were outmatched and unpaid, began to retreat. Unlike the left wing, they did so in an organized fashion, with rider units covering their escape like professional exit strategists. After more than 3 hours of brutal combat, the Battle of Klushino was over. Żółkiewski had defeated a force more than twice his size, but 2 enemy camps still loomed. Żółkiewski, ever the diplomat, offered the mercenaries a choice: join him or go home. Many, fed up with unpaid wages and Russian chaos, switched sides. Those who refused were allowed to leave peacefully. Dmitry Shuisky, realizing the game was up, ordered a full retreat. The Poles rushed his camp like kids at a candy store, plundering everything in sight. Meanwhile, Russian soldiers surrounded near Tsaryovo Zaimoshche heard the news and surrendered. Some even joined the Polish army, because why not? Reinforced and victorious, Żółkiewski marched east. On October 8, 1610, he entered Moscow like a conquering hero. He captured Tsar Vasily Shuisky and his brother Dmitry, marking the beginning of the Polish occupation of Moscow, which lasted for 2 years. It was the climax of a saga filled with impostors, cannon-fired corpses, and cavalry charges that defied logic and gravity. The Battle of Klushino wasn't just a military victory, it was a masterclass in strategy, courage, and Polish stubbornness. Żółkiewski turned a desperate situation into a triumph, and the winged Hussars proved that feathers and fury can conquer empires. Stay tuned. Up next on Dark Crown Chronicles, Romanov dynasty begins, 1613, Mikhail Romanov. How did a 16-year-old boy, hidden in a monastery, become Tsar of Russia and launch a dynasty that would rule for 300 years? What secret deals, noble betrayals, and last-minute miracles led to his coronation? And why did Russia choose him to restore order after the storm? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the rise of the Romanovs, where survival becomes sovereignty.